Hi folks, my name is Talia Plaskett and I am the Protected Crop Specialist at Perennia. So we're coming back at you from the Long Cane Raspberry Pilot Program. I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to take another look at the crop and talk about how it's changed since our last walkthrough video. So these guys have now been in the tunnel for about 7.5 weeks, so obviously it's changed quite a bit since our last walkthrough. And so because of the staggered planting nature of this crop, it makes more sense for us to talk in terms of growing degree hours as opposed to weeks or months spent in the tunnel. And so what that's going to do is try to account for seasonal differences. Obviously, a crop that was planted in April is not going to grow at the same rate as something that was planted in June, July, August, etc. So this particular crop, we're sitting at about 11,000 growing degree hours, which is great. So we're seeing our first flower buds at about 10,000 growing degree hours, and we anticipate a full season sits around 30,000 growing degree hours. So we're about a third of the way through the schedule on this particular batch of plants as it is now. So we do have an outdoor weather station set up as well, just to sort of set the stage a little bit and should be able to show those comparisons nicely between the two environments. Our indoor tunnel here, we're sitting at about 11,000, like I mentioned, and outdoors we're sitting at about 7,300. So there's about a 4,000 growing degree hour difference between the outdoor growing environment and the indoor. So not only are we getting protection from the rain, buffering from wind, and also buffering against those colder night temperatures, but we're also getting a bit of an acceleration in the plant growth, which is awesome to see. So today we're going to just do a bit of a walkthrough. We're going to look at the crop as it is today, talk about management, all that good stuff, and let's go take a look.
So some of the things that we're seeing here are open flowers, we're seeing set fruit, and a lot of pollinator activity. So you'll notice that we have a strong apical dominance on the canes here, so the top few laterals are quite a bit further along compared to the bottom laterals. Once you start to see fruit set in the top 3 to 4 laterals, it's usually a good indication that it's time to switch to a fruiting feed. So this fertilizer recipe is going to support fruit swell and fruit set by providing a higher potassium feed and ensure that you get those top quality berries. One of the major changes we see to the setup here compared to the last video is the addition of trellising. So as the laterals grow out from the main cane, they're going to require extra support in order to sustain the developing fruit down the length of the lateral. Obviously, if you're unable to provide adequate support, you'll start to see breaks along those laterals, and then you're going to lose the fruits that are developing on the ends of those offshoots. In an ideal setup, we're going to see the top of the string sitting just above the height of those planted canes. So in this case, we have the top string at about 1.8 meters. From there, we see about 8 strings that run along the height of the cane. And you want to make sure that these trellising strings are coming out an adequate distance from where you've planted, just to make sure that you're providing support to those laterals at the right point. So 40 to 50 centimeters is going to be the sweet spot on either spot of the cane so that you can support the canopy as it expands out into the alleyways here. Some of the general maintenance that's taken place here includes a good sweep following the transplant into larger pots, which we saw in the first video. So removing the potential habitat for pests and disease is a hugely important part of protected production. We also have to keep an eye out for new primocane shoots that are popping out of the substrate. So by removing this growth, we're ensuring that all of the energy that the plant creates is being diverted to these main laterals and these main shoots. So one of the things we've noticed in the crop in the last few weeks are signs of heat stress. So in this particular case, we were hit with a period of high temperatures and low humidities, which basically means that water was being pulled very quickly through the plant, and the tips of the leaves obviously suffered a little bit as a result. So we're looking at the aged version of heat stress. The first signs of it in the crop, you typically see this curling in the margins as you're seeing here. But it has a bit more of a wrinkled quality to it, and there's not going to be any discoloration. So really what we're looking at is the residual necrosis or resulting necrosis of that heat stress from a couple weeks ago. So in this particular case, like I mentioned, we had high temperatures and low humidities. We would have been able to supplement some additional humidity in the space to try and alleviate some of the stress on those plants. And so that really just goes to show how important it is to have some weather monitoring equipment in your space. So here we're looking at an outdoor weather station, which we've incorporated into our tunnels here. And it's recording quite a few parameters for us. So temperature and humidity are two of the big ones, and that kind of relates to the heat stress that we just saw here. It's important to stay on top of the measurements coming out of your weather station because it will allow you to counteract or create balance within your growing environment, which wouldn't otherwise exist in a field setting. So, this is really just about optimizing your controlled environment, even if it's a semi controlled environment like this high tunnel, and really just trying to alleviate any of the stress that we can off of the crop. So, by growing long canes in a containerized system as opposed to a soil based system, we have to rethink our irrigation management a little bit as well. Dennis Wilson of Delphi UK presented a fabulous webinar as a part of the 2020 to 2021 Getting Into the Weeds series, and I highly recommend anyone who is considering hydroponic production or people who are already pursuing hydroponic production in a soilless substrate to check this out. We also have some great fact sheets on our Perennia website, which delve into this a little bit. So here we're illustrating the most basic way to monitor your irrigation setup. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as a permanent setup, as you're obviously risking breakage to the cane by having to lift and remove that container from underneath it. But it just goes to show that looking after your irrigation scheduling can be quite basic and quite inexpensive. So here we have collected leachate or drainage coming out of the bottom of this one pot over 24 hours. And we're going to compare this volume to the amount that has been fed to the crop over a 24-hour period as well. So looking at that percentage of your feed that's coming out of the bottom is going to tell you how much water the plant is using over the course of a day, and we can make adjustments from there. So the ideal value for that leachate percentage is going to be about 10 to 20% of the total feed that you've given to the crop in that 24-hour cycle. So because we're only talking about the basic setup at this point, I definitely want to redirect you to the videos from Dennis or the Perennia fact sheets, which talks about the importance of looking at that drainage on an hourly basis or a per watering basis, as well as when do we see that drainage and what does that mean. So in addition to the volume here, we're also going to be measuring the pH and the EC. So here, Amber is just looking at our drip feed. So we have an additional dripper that's been placed within the canopy, and we're just collecting it in this container. So comparing the pH of the feed solution to what you think is in your fertilizer bucket is going to be a helpful check to make sure that everything is in place. And you also want to see how that value changes compared to your drainage. So for EC, for example, if we're feeding an EC of, let's say, 1.8, and we're having a value that's significantly lower than that, say 0.3 in our drainage, that tells us that the crop is quite hungry and that you can increase your EC to make sure that you're supplementing adequate nutrients. If you're getting an EC that's significantly higher than your feed, so say you're giving a 1.8 again and you come back with something like 4.0, you have an accumulation of salts within that pot and within that substrate, and that could be impacting your water uptake, and that you should do something to flush out that system a little bit. So this is really important to do on a daily basis. The thing with a hydroponic setup such as this one is that you can see rapid changes on a daily basis, weekly. So it's important to stay top of that and try to mitigate it before you see any long-term issues to your crop. These checks here should take no more than 15 to 20 minutes a day, and it can be easily integrated into your routine before you even sit down at the office and get started for the day. So this is really the engine room of the entire system. We get a really good idea of the nutrients that our plants are getting, the amount of water our plants are getting. We have a good idea of the environment, and we're really just trying to make it easy for the crop to grow and easy for them to realize that genetic potential in terms of yield.
All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us here today. As always, if you have any questions about anything you saw in the video or anything about long cane raspberry production in general, feel free to reach out to Sunny Murray and I, and we will get you sorted. Otherwise, I'll be back in a couple weeks for another crop update. See you then.